Hey, what's going on, guys? This is Lurkin from Mobalytics. Today, I'm going to be diving deep into the PTR, how Sorcerer looks going forward, some of the problems with the PTR, the good from the PTR, and what it's going to look like next season. And I'm going to showcase 3 builds. One is mine. I think these are going to be the 3 strongest builds if nothing changes. One is mine, the Frozen Orb Hybrid with just splintering a 1x value aspect on, say, a pair of gloves. It was clearing pit in about 4 minutes. Then we have a Chain Lightning build that's using Azurewrath by Roxy. That was clearing pit in about 3 minutes. We'll see if Azurewrath survives. It kind of didn't get hit by the stat squish, so we think it may not survive. And then next we have Mekuna's Shakuna, the pure lightning spear build, which was very fast, very strong, will clear the pit in upwards of 2 minutes and 18 seconds. But it's all dependent if they fix Perdition, because the new Perdition helmet that gives you 60% damage, it had this 200% damage versus angels and demons, and we think it was multiplicative instead of additive. So as you see in his video, one of the bosses, the little Hive Master boss, is considered a demon, and he got giga nuked in like 7 seconds. It's pretty crazy. But I'm gonna get right into this Frozen Orb build. Champion Aura guys are terrible. Very laggy, but still a very respectable clear. Once they stop going unstoppable, they get nuked. We're about to make our way to the boss. So the mobbing section took about 3 minutes. Let's get to
how long was that?
Definitely been bridged. Let's see. Wait, let's go back. All right. So as you can see, you know, the boss takes about a minute.
Some changes to the build. We took the control glyph.
Boss damage is going down pretty steadily. The whole clear about 4 minutes and some change. And if I'd gotten one of the good bosses, probably would have killed him in about 30 or 45 seconds. All right, we can end it there. So next, let's go to, oh no, I don't want to ruin the slideshow. So next, let's watch Mekuna's. Let's check it out. Let's sort of check out the last few seconds of it. Let's go back a little bit more so we can see. Let's go back even more. Alright, so you can just see that it's giga nuking very fast. And the key thing is it does a little bit more damage than the Frozen Orb, so he's able to nuke the mobs before they go unstoppable. If you can kill them in one rotation, everything dies just that much faster because you're able to utilize your control glyph multis more. A lot of builds are taking control now because mobbing takes about 2/3 of the time, if not more, and then bossing is a lot less cancerous than it was in the past. So now let's watch this Giga Nuke. And this is with the new Perdition helmet. Hive Master is taking about twice the damage that he should be, we think, because that 200% plus was actually 200% X. And that boss is just shredded. Alright, now next we're going to go into a build that I was actually really amazed with, was Roxy's Chain Lightning build with Azurewrath. And then she's going to go over the gear after, and I'll kind of stop on the Azurewrath and show you why it's doing more than intended. She showed some screenshots of 5 billion plus. I was able to get a 1.4 billion myself on just a normal 800 Azurewrath without greater effects on the cold damage portion, but let's get into it. Music's very fitting. This build is insane. And there's no Andariels, there's no Starlight. You just use a lucky hit restore on a focus with Fist of Fate, and your mana is pretty topped off. But like, this build was so fun to play. Like, if Azurewrath survives, this is definitely going to be like one of the builds. It's crazy. Her gear is also like the most insane thing I've ever seen. Like, GA in Ami with ranks to Conj Mastery and Death Blaze. Just look at this boss. Just got Giga nuked, and then I'll stay, and you can sort of see the gear that it took to get this done. Yeah, 4 GA Perdition, perfect raiment, 300% GA Fist of Fate. And let's scroll back. So one thing we need to look at is, so Axial Conduit, its value got reduced down to about 3,700 during the stat squish. But then we look at Azurewrath and we see, so she got a GA on lucky hit chance, 40% chance to deal cold damage. When you combine those with Fists of Fate, it's going to be insane. And it's 17,550 with a triple masterwork. It's so much damage, and that's why it's just doing so much. Like, it has a 40% chance to proc this, which is a value of like 5-ish times what the Axial Conduit will give. So it's pretty insane. And then, I mean, just look at that amulet. It's totally insane. This build shredded. And now let's get into our State of Sorcerer post PTR in going into Vessel of Hatred. How are we looking? So the too long didn't watch is the splintering aspect is giga busted. Chain Lightning had that cheeky build, and the 60% damage Perdition Helm, the new Uber unique, is pretty crazy. So here are my overall thoughts on the PTR and the changes. So the stat squish was counteracted basically entirely by the new glyph multipliers, and that is if we look at control, which is a very good glyph going into next season because the focus is more on mobbing than it is on giga tanky bosses. It's got a ton of it's got a very large value of additive now. You know, 61% per 5 decks. It's got its old 20% damage to stun or frozen enemies, and now it has 28.5% damage to crowd control enemies. So if you're able to kill elites before they go unstoppable, you're going to do a shit ton of damage. And as we can see, the Axial Conduit, this used to have a value of around 24,000, 23,000, whatever. Now it's down to 3,500. The PTR boosts themselves were a giga fail. You were able to get basically any quad GA Uber unique that you wanted. But the problem was then the caches that had all the uniques were only 600 item power. It was also very cumbersome to create ancestral gear because the menu was very laggy. You'd have to reboost your character and it would equip all your equip slots with new gear. People ran into issues. I did as well, where it wipes your entire character. And like all my gear that I had on that I had like farmed was gone. And then I was unable to get new uniques. Like I had to go farm bosses with whatever boss mats I happened to have left. And then when you would open these caches that had legendaries and uniques, and they were all just garbage. So it was very cumbersome to even get greater affix ancestrals. All right, but the pits felt very good. 2/3 of them were mobbing, about a third was bossing. And I know what you saw those clears in 2 or 3 minutes, and you're gonna think pits are too easy. They need to get buffed. Pits are too easy. Pits are not too easy. There are overtuned builds, and there are overtuned aspects such as the splintering aspect because it scales with critical strike damage. And now look at this control glyph. Now when you have a destruction glyph, you're getting like 1,000% more critical strike damage, and splintering is just absolutely feasting right now because of it. But then there's a large gap in the balance between Sark skills. If you were to go in with Meteor or even Charge Bolts or even Blizzard, which has typically been a very reliable build, even in a T90 you were sort of struggling. So, and you need to be able to do a T100 to max out your glyphs, because if you go like 5 tiers below, the chance to upgrade one of your glyphs from 99 to 100, if you're doing a 95, it drops down to like 10%. It's pretty crazy. So don't let anybody tell you that they need to add more tiers. They don't need to buff the pits. The pits were fine. They felt very good leveling up, albeit I was on the Frozen Orb Hybrid build. So 800 IP ancestrals were really rare. They seem to have about a 5 to 10% drop rate. Basically what happens is all of the gear, say you went and you farmed a Varshan. You killed Varshan. What he did was he would drop 5 uniques only. And most of the time they were 750 item power. You were drowning in these 750 item power items that you can only upgrade to 4 out of 4. They were never GA, and you can only upgrade them to 4 out of 4, which means you only get 1 masterwork hit. So it was incredibly hard to get ancestral gear that you could masterwork fully, and people really didn't like it. The Obusite that you can get from Nightmare Dungeons, it felt pretty scarce. I'm not gonna lie. It felt like they need to buff the drop rates. However, leveling was very fast. Like 0 to 60, you could just farm strongholds, or even I went from 50 to 60 in like a single Helltide. It was crazy. At level 60, I think you start with 225 Paragon points, or something like that, maybe 221, whatever. But you would level up continually, so you'd be at like level 201 or something, and then I think you get the plus 24 for the areas, whatever. So you'd have your new level was like 201 in the bottom near your character, and then like every 20, 30, 40 million XP, you would get an additional Paragon point. And I ended up getting to around 237, and the scaling was pretty intense. Like it started off, I was getting the Paragon points, but then it kept increasing. And I was looking at needing 60 or 70 million XP to go from 237 to 238. And then it just kept increasing. I don't know if there was a cap. So most people aren't going to hit those 300 Paragon points. So the whole talk of, oh, like 5 glyphs is too little, we need 6 glyphs, that's out the window, because it felt the amount of points that you start with at level 60 felt very good for getting your 5 boards, getting your 5 glyphs, or, for Sorcerer, like 3 glyphs within the points that you were allotted. And then the rest of the Paragon points, the additional 75 or 100 or whatever that you get, were nice for filling out the quality of life, like max life, Vuln DR, Burning DR, etc., around all your boards. So that was really great. There's a new top dog. Shaco has been slightly dethroned, albeit it'll be easier to get a greater affix Shaco, so those 54% cooldown Shacos are going to be super nice. But Air of Perdition is absolutely crazy, and what's awesome about Air of Perdition is basically that you get 60% damage. And if you're in a party, you can have chances where you steal the favor from them, and then you're going to deal like 120, you're going to deal 240% more damage. But it's just a very good helmet, especially on things like Frozen Orb or Pure Lightning Spear, even that Chain Lightning build, because it's got lucky hit chance, movement speed, ranks to core, and then a fat 54% critical strike damage. What's awesome about this helmet is that it lets you drop off Asu boots, armor, and all, like max life and armor. They got squished, so you only need 1,000 armor now. But so it was a little bit difficult to get armor if you weren't wearing Shaco. But it wasn't that difficult. Like, it's going to be fine. If you're wearing Air of Perdition, you're not going to be able to wear like Tibalt's and a unique chest. Like, maybe you can if you get like a GA pair of boots with armor, but I digress. But there's also a new bit of a top dog for chest pieces. So Raiment has always been the best in slot for damage because of these 7 rings to glass cannon and the intelligence on it that you can get. But I will say, if your build, such as what Frozen Orb does, is if your build can utilize a ton of passives, like you have Glass Cannon, Elemental Dominance, you have all the... One second, my headset's about to die. You have all the Frost passives, you have some of the new passives. This +1 rank to all passives was really strong on the new Uber Unique chest, the Shroud of False Death. And this whole stealth mechanic was a little cheeky, but this 482% additive damage was pretty irrelevant. So the new glyph, the board, and the key passive were very strong. I like them a lot. The new Eliminator glyph, I thought this was going to end up being magic nodes, but it ended up being all the normal common nodes. So as you can see, I didn't even take much dex or strength along the board or willpower, but I took all the int nodes and I got 500 intelligence from it, in addition to me dealing 10% more damage to elites and another 28.5% damage to elites. This glyph is must slot on every build. The new fundamental release board was really strong. It had a 30% damage multiplier. For every build, it's a must slot board, and it had some really good rare nodes like DR Burning with some armor, DR Vuln with max life, some damage to burning enemies, damage to elites, damage taken over time, resistance to all elements, and just like armor, resist is a little hard to get if you aren't wearing Tyraels. Like I've seen some builds that aren't running Tyraels take, like GA all resist on boots to try and hit it now. It's definitely a lot harder than it was in the past. It isn't just free. And Enlightenment is basically must slot. This is the new key passive. It's basically must slot on just about every build. The stacks were super free to get. Like when I was casting Frozen Orb, all the stuff that got created from my amulet counted as casting any skill. So we'll see if that changes. But basically, you know, you would get the buff for 10 seconds, and then the second it ended, it would shoot right back up to 100, so there was essentially no downtime, and there was very little downtime on other builds too. Especially if you're running like something like a fire build where you're casting Ice Blades a lot. I digress. But you got 25% damage, a bunch of mana regen, and 20% attack speed. It was just really awesome, and it was great on every build. Um, Onto runes. So on your gear, let's say you have a chess piece. Let's pull this up. Let's say you have a chest. So basically, you were able to slot runes in either your helmet, your chest piece, your pants, or if you had a staff there. So you would have to forego putting 300 total intelligence there, or like 144% crit strike damage there, and you would slot them on your, like, say you slotted them on your helmet and your chest piece. You would slot these two runes instead of the gems, and basically what it all came down to was every build essentially ran Tam Ohm and Yul Yom. Very annoying to say. But basically, it was you had a generator, cast a non-channeled core skill. I think you only had to cast 20. I think it was 20 core skills, um, and then you would get enough offering to evoke the Barbarian's Enhanced Warcry, which would improve your damage. So Warcry itself gives you 15%, and I'm pretty sure Berserking gives you an innate 25%. So this Warcry was a lot of damage, and then we also had one where you would cast the skill with a cooldown that would generate 500 offering, and then the whole idea was to evoke the Druid's Petrify, which is their ultimate. And Petrify would go off in a circle around you, so you had to be near the enemies. And this was 600 offering, so it was proccing. It was proccing a lot, build dependent, but it had like a 5 or 6 second cooldown. But what Petrify does is it increases your critical strike damage to all enemies by 30%. And then if it happened to hit a boss, it would increase the damage to 50%, and it would last for 6 seconds. So you basically had like permanent uptime for this on bosses, and you had 50% uptime for this on mobs. Uh, the rest of the rooms were pretty mid, pretty underwhelming. There were large gaps in offering generation between the some of the runes, and there were like very obvious damage gaps between some of these rooms. I think they tried to get a little too cute with some of them. They were like, become injured, get 1,000 offering, and it was like, no, I want these active all the time. I think they could have done a lot better job with the runes. And then I tried the meteorite one that I know people were like kind of a little excited, but obviously we knew it was kind of going to be pretty bad. And they were super dinky and just they did like no damage. All right, so let's move into familiars. I was really hyped for familiars. I still am. I think they're good. I think they have a purpose, and that's giving yourself either providing you either burning, chill, or providing yourself damage. But the problem is you can't really run a pure familiar build because it's capped at 6. You can only get 6 out, so you really can't. I mean, maybe if you could get like 18 of these suckers out, like you could really stack up the burning damage, but because that would be how you get the most damage out of it is with the fire familiars. It just didn't really work. They were kind of buggy. Winter Glass and Unstable Currents, they only made fire familiars if you didn't have it on your skill bar. Um, no matter like what nodes that you took, it would basically just always make a fire familiar, which is pretty awesome if you want to use it as like a firebolt enchantment. But the enchantment would not work unless it was on your skill bar, so that was really annoying. The cap at 6 familiars like really limit their viability as a main damage source. But here's the familiars again, 3 charges. The little familiar guy comes out, he starts hitting stuff. The fire one would burn, the cold one would apply chill, whatever. The lightning one would stun. It was okay. Um, but the Summon Familiar, I thought that if you took Summon Familiar, they were gonna this familiar itself that you casted was gonna rotate. But really, all it did it rotated the familiars on your skill bar. Like every 2 seconds or so, it would go from fire to cold, then to lightning, then back to fire, and it's just this thing was pretty bad. But Invoked Familiar was good. Roxy ended up using that on her build, so she would be casting Chain Lightning, and she would always have Shock Familiars on her skill bar, and she would cast a Familiar, and she would do 10% more shock damage. So that's pretty awesome. Or she could even get a cold one out as well, so that she could do 10% more cold damage with Azurewrath. So it has a purpose. I'm not really impressed with the unique, mainly because this is about like increasing your familiar's damage. It's explosion size, you get ranks, it's chance for familiars to hit twice, and as a whole, I was not impressed with the damage that familiars can provide. It's sort of a dead from the start because of the cap at 6. Now we're going to go into our tier list, and then I have some slides. I'm going to break it down by tier and sort of talk about them. So our best builds are pure Lightning Spear, the Frozen Orb Hybrid, a little bit behind, and then obviously Firebolt, but Firebolt's always going to be really strong, mainly because you can still abuse Shatter and Greater Fight, and like with Greater Fireball to really cheese the living shit out of mobs and everything. But honestly, I put this thing in A tier. I would actually move it down to A tier just because it's kind of annoying to play. Um, I'm hesitant and I keep Chain Lightning in A tier because I tried it without Azurewrath and it by itself felt A tier. It wasn't as good as these two builds, pure splintering or the hybrid with Frozen Orb. It just wasn't as strong, and I will see if Azurewrath survives because I don't think that 18,000, 17,000 value that it have is gonna. I think that was an oversight. It was supposed to be squished. Ball Lightning, it does ball lightning things. It'll always be fine. You can always stack up damage. Blizzard is good, but I think it's going to suffer a little bit just because there's no burst and there's a lot more focus on mobbing. Fireball, we couldn't really test it because it was bugged. Illuminators were, but Fireball and Charge Bolts will probably round out B tier. Like Charge Bolts felt surprisingly good, not with the new aspect though, but just overall, I don't know what was. I think it just felt good. And then Incinerate, and just rounding out the pack. Familiars, just not that strong standalone. Ice Shards still doesn't have a unique, so it's really not that good. Arclash just has some AOE issues, not the best boss damage. These two are kind of slow, even though they're a little bit reliable. They're just slow. And then Meteor still is just really bad, requires so much investment. Hydra, I had a lot of high hopes from Hydra, but I just there was no AoE for pits. It was just bad in pit. Lay down, baby. There was no AoE for pits. The burning damage takes a while to stack up, and it only hits one target. And then we have teleport. I tried Asadora's. It was really bad. I don't recommend it. And then I think pure teleport is still just going to be sort of a meme. Maybe it'll be C tier, but you just really can't get the damage up that high or proc it enough for it to compete with the likes of like splintering and others. So the core problem with Sorcerer and like why these builds are S tier and the rest will just sort of never compare is basically it comes down to capped multis and uncapped slash double dipping multis. So we're gonna go. Most of Sorcerer is capped. You look at Blizzard. This is glacial. It does a set amount of damage, 1100, 13. Maybe if you have it on a staff, it's 2200 or something. I don't exactly know what the value is, but the value is capped. And then same thing with the new charge bolts aspect. The value is also capped at 2200. This is with a staff, but I think the aspect was on the amulet. And then Asus Ferocity, 25% X critical strike damage. And then some crit chance, and you can't really increase it any further. Combustion, 60% damage, an additional 4% per unique source of burning. You can't really get that many unique sources. You can't scale up the damage that high. Then we look at our legendary nodes. Icefall, 25% increased damage to vulnerable enemies, double the frozen, burning instinct, 80% burning damage. And then we compare those to uncapped slash double dipping mechanics. And the only uncapped thing that Sorcerer really has is the splintering aspect, and that's why it's one of the best builds in the game, because this aspect has, I'm pretty sure this is either on an amulet or a staff, the new value, I forget, but Lightning Spear hits, it arcs, it deals this much damage, and it chains to 5 other enemies, so it really lends itself to mobbing, which is why it's so strong in pits right now. This damage is increased by your critical strike damage bonus. So basically, the damage is increased by 1% for every 1% crit strike damage. So unless they change this thing is just going to have an absolute stranglehold on the class, because with the destruction glyph alone, you can get 1,000 crit strike damage, and we used to only get in total 1,500% crit strike damage, which is 1,500% more damage. And now, we're probably able to get 2,000, 2,500 crit strike damage. So splintering's hitting like an absolute truck. And then as I mentioned before, Shatter itself got nerfed and capped, that it can't cascade into itself anymore, but it survived because of greater fireball. You apply a bunch of burning damage and then you hit things with fireball, and then this 10% like you have all your burning damage on the enemy, and then you hit it with Greater Fireball. And then this 10% damage from Greater Fireball also takes into account all your multipliers, and then it just like does so much damage because you've applied this much burning damage, and then you apply 10% of it, and then that 10% goes through all your multipliers again. So you have like all your multipliers from the burning, and then the 10% from the fireball, and then all of them again, and then everything just shatters. So it's still really good. And let's like look at Rogue. So this was a screenshot I got from Sanctum. So Victimize, dealing direct damage to a vulnerable enemy, has up to a 50% chance to cause an explosion, dealing 250,000% of the damage, same type around them. Its damage is increased by 120% of your vulnerable damage bonus. So this is one of their key passives, and you compare that to one of ours, which is your burning damage deals 60% more damage. And then this one, the damage is increased by 120% of your vulnerable damage bonus. So the current damage of just one of these procs was 13,562. They were dealing billions of damage with Victimize. Because I'm not sure if this, like, I think this damage goes off and then all your multipliers probably apply to it again. So they were just dealing so much damage. And then I don't think they're using this one as much anymore. But then you look at like it's just like it's like on a fundamental level of how our passives are, just like super capped. And then this one, while both attack speed bonuses are active, you deal increased damage equal to 15% of your damage versus close bonus. So say you could get 1500 per, say you could get 1500% damage to close. That would equal like 225% more damage. And then you have all your damage to close, you're fighting close, you're getting all of those additives, and then you're also getting like a 225% damage bonus. Or if not, I don't know how much additive Rose can get. But then you can compare that to like 225% versus 80%. All right. So next, let's go into the S tier build. So Pure Spear is still top dog. It's still very hard to gear, and I'm going to be really honest, I think it feels terrible until it's fully kitted. I tried it with the GA Shaco with like a 750 Tal Rasha, and I didn't really like how it felt, but obviously Mekuna pulls it off, and like a 230, and I put an asterisk here because it's just because we were all using Perdition, so like some of the runs, some of the enemy types are counted as angels and demons, and we were dealing like double damage to them. You could really tell some of the elites just got giga nuked. So it's like a 2.5 minute to 4 minute T100. Frozen Orb Hybrid, I got a 4 minute one, but I bet I can get that down to 3 if my Perdition had been lucky and gotten like a better boss that I could have nuked. So that's like 3 to 5 minute. And then I think Firebolt's still going to be really strong. Like I was saying, it's going to be able to shatter its way to victory. But the Frozen Orb Hybrid was no slouch. Just a ton of damage ticks, anywhere from like 14 to 114 million that like either the splintering or the Frozen Orb was going off. I think Frozen Orb alone can hit for like 60 million. So it's a lot. There's a lot of scaling because you can get the 30 Conjuration Mastery stacks. And that's part of the reason why the hybrid is like it closed the gap to Spear was due to the 30 Conjuration Mastery cap. They lost a lot of damage, but they also, both the builds gained damage because of the new Destruction Glyph. But this one gained a lot, but it also lost a lot of stacks. And then, as I mentioned, the Shatter and Greater Fireball stuff with Firebolt. Alright, so next let's move into our A tier. So there was Chain Lightning, and this is the 5.2 billion damage proc that came from Azurewrath. But as I said, this lucky hit chance to deal 18,000 cold damage. It should have gotten squished, as we see with Axial Conduit, but I tried Chain Lightning in a pure build, and I was still able to get like 600,000 damage axial procs, 600 million damage axial procs. So it was still really strong, and like Azurewrath and Fist of Fate were just busted. Ball Lightning, it always just finds a way. Every season, it just can't die. It's just being able to stack up a ton of Ball Lightnings. It's just strong. It'll always be there. It's relentless. And then I think Blizzard is still really strong. It had really good boss damage. It just sort of struggled in pits because there was no burst, and I don't know, maybe this chance for Ice Spike to deal double damage was bugged, but like it got a new temper that basically gives it twice as much damage. And I think they removed the ice spike damage temper, so now you just have to take cold, but that's fine because it interacts with the new passive. So some of these builds that don't need crit strike damage, while enlightening, your bonus damage to fire, lightning, and cold are equal to them combined. So like if you have say 500% of each cold, lightning, and fire, that additive will jump up to like 1500. So you get like a free 1000% additive to whatever damage you're dealing, whatever skill you're dealing damage with. Um, so I expected a lot more from Blizzard. We'll see if some of this stuff was bugged, but like essentially you get like double, if not triple damage from having Blue Rose due to this additive and this chance for Ice Spike to explode twice. And then it's not an explode twice aspect here, it's a chance for Ice Spike to deal double damage. So I think it's still going to be really strong. I just probably needed to gear it better. So Illuminate, next is Fireball and Charge Bolts. I slot in B tier. Illuminators were bugged. So right here. So they changed it from, it used to say Fireball deals 30 to 0% less damage. They changed it to Fireball now deals 70 to 100% of normal damage. But the problem is when they changed that value, they instead of dealing a percent of normal damage, they left it as dealing less damage. So if you had 100% Illuminator, you deal the 100% less damage. So you literally got 0 damage when you casted Fireball. But I think it's gonna round out B tier. It was pretty strong. It's gonna still be good. Charge Bolts actually felt really good for whatever reason. I was having some pretty good success with it in T95s, even T100s a little bit. But there's this new aspect, Charge Flash. After you hit charge bolts, after you hit enemies 50 times, the next 3 casts deal 2500 damage. It's literally the definition of mid, and the main reason there is because, let's find it with it. It's because when you look at splintering, its damage, it does this much damage, and its damage is increased by your critical strike damage bonus. But then for whatever reason, when they made this, they didn't give it any scaling to it. So what is it supposed to do? It's just going to deal this amount of damage. And the same way, like, Blizzard is even suffering because Glacial doesn't have that scaling component to it. Glacial would be a lot better if it had a cold damage scaling component to it, something. So Charge Flash was terrible, and it just didn't do good. And this is last on the list. It's sort of the C and F tier. These builds are just really struggling. We'll start with Meteor. It's just not worth the investment. You can't get the damage high enough. Like Fireball, at least Staff of Endless Rage and Illuminators are so good that it increases its damage by enough to like make it palatable and passable. But with the Starfall, it just doesn't give enough value to warrant it becoming a cooldown and having to basically min-max your gear to make it feel good, to min-max your gear as much as a Lightning Spear build needs to min-max. So it's just still terrible. And then my boy Ice Shards, it needs unique. Where's it at? I hope they're saving it because it needs something to bring it up from the fucking grave because it's bad. Our burning builds, Incinerate, Pure Firewall, and Hydra, they're just slow as tortoises. They take a while. Like you can go into the training dummy and you can stack up a ton of burning damage and like post a really nice screenshot. But then when you go into a dungeon, it's like you have to kill packs and packs of mobs, and it takes so long to stack up all the burning damage that I just don't think they're good. Hydra has no AoE, and the count says 6 for familiars. So I don't think they're very good in a standalone. Even if you could combine like a Hydra familiar build, we'll see. We'll see. Maybe familiars. I couldn't get it to work because I don't know. Even with familiars on the bar, maybe this thing isn't F tier. Maybe it's C tier. If you run familiar enchant, but then you also have Hydra on the bar, I don't know. I couldn't get it to feel that good. Teleport was kind of mid. Arc Lash just doesn't have the boss damage, so yeah, it's looking like basically pick one of these builds. Your best bets are going to be pure Lightning Spear if you want to kit it out, or if Gearings ends up being really hard because as we saw with the Ancestral Uniques being so hard to get, that I don't know. The Frozen Orb build with the hybrid is still going to be really strong. I think it'll it's still really strong. It hits really hard. There's just so many ticks. If Chain Lightning survives, that build's gonna be really good, but you're gonna have to get yourself a good Azurewrath to make it really shine. And then you're like your entry level end game builds, they're like Fireball and Charge builds. They're still gonna be pretty reliable. Like if you get yourself Illuminators and an Endless Rage that are pretty decent pretty early, like definitely you can run that until you can sort of build ideally one of these Frozen Orb or Spear, and then if you like really love these skills, they'll be pretty good. They're not going to be as strong as Spear. And this build in this aspect are just they have a stranglehold on the meta, and unless something's done, it's just going to be like the only things that you can play. All right, I'm looking for Mobalytics. Thanks for listening to me rambling. I'm going to be playing StarCraft in the First Descendant until we get more patch notes, and then I'll cook up some builds, and then I'll see everybody in October. Peace.